Good morning. I know you can't reply, by the way. I wasn't expecting people to shout back at me then. But you should have access to the chat and the Q&A. So you're very welcome to say hello there. Let me know that you can hear me. That would be great. We have just done some testing with the team, but it'd be nice to see some hellos in the chat. We are recording this webinar, which is why we've got everybody muted and cameras off. Thank you for the messages. Good morning. As long as everyone can hear me, see the screen, not so much me. Don't need to see me, but yeah, as long as you can see the slides, that's great. Due to start at 11, the meeting is being recorded, so I'm conscious that there's some people who've registered for the purposes of getting the recording, which is absolutely fine, and we will circulate that afterwards as well. So if you do need to disappear at any point, that's fine. You won't miss anything. Sammy and Tiana from our team are on the call as well. Sammy, I'm going to move my screen around now. So if you could just keep admitting people, please, who try and join, that would be a big help. Thank you. Good morning, Jill. Morning, Tiana. Good, thank you. Excellent. Right, it's 1 minute past 11, so I'm going to get going with the content. If anyone else joins us late, that's absolutely fine. First of all, thank you all for joining this webinar. Got about probably 45 minutes of content. We'll see how we go. During the layout of my screen doesn't allow me to see questions and chat during presenting, but please do pop them in if they arise during the presentation, because I will switch my screens around again at the end and I'll come back to those afterwards. So feel free to pop those in as and when you think about them. What we're going to cover today, a bit of a background to the Employment Rights Bill. It's all about future-proofing your business. We know we've got Labour government now. There's change on the horizon, not happened yet, but that's effectively what we're doing today. We're going to look at what's happened up to now. What do we know at the moment about the Employment Rights Bill, including what it is, what might be included, what this would mean for you, and what the impact would be on SMEs if the changes do go ahead. And it is all a bit ifs, buts, maybes, as we know. What is said at the start of a new government isn't always what happens, but we can only go off what we know at this point. And we're going to importantly look at how we can potentially look to mitigate the impact if these things do go ahead. So I'll start off. I think most of you on the call have met me before, but just in case, some of you might not have actually met our team. So we've got one of our lovely new photos of our team in the top corner of this slide. So left to right, we've got Tiana, our lovely HR advisor. We've got Vanessa, our senior HR advisor and trainer. And we've got our wonderful Sammy, who's been with us the longest now. So some of you, I'm sure, will have spoke to Sammy. And then there's me. So that's our team. I always just think it's nice to know who you're speaking to, isn't it? So that's us. So let's get cracking then. Background to the Employment Rights Bill. So within Labour's manifesto during all the run-up to the election, there was all this campaigning. Their big ploy, I guess, was plan to make work pay. It was a green paper, and it effectively set out what their plans would be if they were to get into power. As we all know, they did, and therefore in the King's Speech in July, the government announced the Employment Rights Bill. So that was the first we heard of this bill. The bill is to be brought before Parliament in the first 100 days. So we do keep hearing, oh, there's going to be lots of change in the first 100 days. But the key point is it's a bill to be brought before Parliament, not necessarily acts to be put in place and that kind of thing. But effectively, the King's Speech didn't really show anything massively different to what Labour's manifesto was. So there was not really any surprises there in the King's Speech. It was almost just reiterating what they had said their plans would be. And in addition, there are plans to make quite significant changes to the national living wage, and we're going to cover that in more detail on one of the slides that's to come. And you'll see as we go through this presentation, the number of changes that are being proposed in relation to employment law in particular. If they all do go ahead as planned, it would be a massive change, and actually the biggest change in employment law since 1975. Now, I had to look what happened in 1975. I wasn't around then. I certainly wasn't doing HR then. But effectively, 1975 is when certain discrimination laws came into effect. So the Disability Discrimination Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, some maternity protections came in then as well. And actually the introduction of unfair dismissal as a legal concept was introduced in 1975. So that was all quite a big time, and we're nearly 50 years on from there. So yeah, there's potentially a lot of change, and I think that's what's potentially causing some panic, but there is no need to panic just yet, and that's the purpose of this webinar today. So let's just first have a look then at what is likely or potentially going to be included in the Employment Rights Bill, and what does that actually mean? Well, the Employment Rights Bill, it's going to be that. It's a bill. It's going to be a piece of legislation that's going to outline plans. So a bill is very much a proposal. It's not in itself going to be the law. So it would need to actually get passed through Parliament. It would need to gain royal assent, and then it would effectively become the law after that. So getting the Employment Rights Bill before Parliament in that 100 days is the first step, effectively. So this is why we don't really need to do anything right now. We haven't got new laws right now, and we haven't got any plans or hard dates where new laws are actually going to take effect. So in October, which is effectively 100 days after Labour came into power, we're going to be looking sometime in October to get the detail of this bill. What is it actually going to mean? It's likely then going to be a further few months at least before any changes are actually made, because we all know the process of actually writing acts and regulations isn't a quick job. Or we hope it's not a quick job, because any kind of rushed legislation, if we all remember the COVID pandemic, there was an awful lot of rushed legislation, which had to be the case, of course, but it's never very good or helpful. So we hope that it's not the case that we're going to get rushed legislation in this case. So at the minute, because we don't actually have any of these things, we don't even have the Employment Rights Bill itself, it's being drafted at the moment, we don't have the detail. So whilst we know what they've said they're going to do, we don't know what's actually going to be in it. We can just go off what we think based on what has been said at the minute. And here's a good overview. So going back to that thing about it being one of the biggest changes in around 50 years, you can see there's 8 real key bits on the screen there, and I'm going to go through each in more detail. But if all these go ahead, we can see straight away that this is going to be quite major for employment law, therefore for all employers and HR people, employment solicitors, tribunals. There's going to be all sorts of knock-on effects. So I'm going to go through each of these one by one. First of all, being 0 hours contracts. Now this won't be, and as with most of these things, they're not necessarily going to be applicable to all businesses, just those who currently use 0 hours contracts or who are thinking of building a business based around 0 hours. Particular industries that are likely to be impacted are hospitality, care sector, and those are industries that we work with quite a lot. So Labour have backtracked on this one. So the initial rumours back probably last year and early this year were that 0 hours contracts would be banned altogether. Whereas there's been a bit of backpedaling in that it is now thought people will have the right to kind of opt in to a 0 hours arrangement, as in the individual worker would be able to opt in. The idea is to stop exploitative 0 hours contracts. So where companies are maybe using 0 hours as a way to maintain flexibility for them, but that means that you've got individuals who don't know 1 week to the next what their working hours are going to be, whether they're even going to get any hours at all, therefore not being able to actually plan their budgets and so forth. So this would mean that they've got effectively a right to a contract that actually reflects the number of hours that they regularly work. So if someone is on a 0 hours contract, but they're regularly working 10, 15 hours a week, we're going to see that they have a right to a contract that reflects 10 or 15 hours a week. So whilst on the face of it, that seems very fair, which it does, we do, in my opinion, still need that option for 0 hours contracts for those reasons that I just mentioned. The care sector, the hospitality sector are very reliant on that flexibility due to fluctuations in demand. The other change in terms of 0 hours is ensuring that workers are entitled to reasonable notice, and there's a reason that's in quotations. That means we don't really know what that means, don't know what reasonable is just yet. Reasonable notice of any changes in shifts, and a real key change will be this proportionate compensation if shifts are cancelled or changed. So that again could cause huge problems for those businesses that do have a number of 0 hours workers, where through no fault of anybody's, the fluctuation is there in terms of demand. So shifts have to be cancelled last minute or swapped last minute. There's going to be some financial penalties there for those businesses. So if you are a business who does engage 0 hours workers at the moment, we're just encouraging people to think a bit differently. Obviously, 0 hours contracts do have the place, and I hope they will always have the place. My background was in the care sector, which is why I'm quite keen on keeping those, because I know how vital they are to that sector in particular, amongst others. But thinking about what other type of contracts might get the same benefits, the same type of flexibility. So we've put on the screen there, so fixed term contracts can be very helpful for short-term peaks in demand. Again, it's going to be a guaranteed number of hours, so it's different to 0 hours, but it's for a fixed period of time. Seasonal contracts, so thinking hospitality, where they may pull in young workers to work during summer holidays, bar staff, maybe seasonal contracts are going to be helpful there. But all of that stuff does create additional admin. It does therefore create additional cost in time spent writing those contracts, issuing them every time, and actually someone keeping on top of who's on what kind of contract, whereas a 0 hours contract just kind of sits in the background. It's also thinking about, I mean, it's hard to think about this at the minute, but thinking about what happens if we cancel or amend shifts last minute. What I'm encouraging clients to do at the minute is just start taking note of how often that happens and what are the reasons for that happening, so that we're more aware of the potential impact if there is then a financial implication of cancelling those shifts. We need to start thinking about, well, actually, this would cost us money. So rather than willy-nilly cancelling, changing shifts, we need to put a bit more thought into that and actually start trying to mitigate the chances of that happening, which is a good thing in any case, but even more so if there's going to be financial penalties later down the line. So then we have additional day one rights, and this is something that has been talked about an awful lot, including by me, because it's going to be such a massive change. There's a few rights that Labour have said will kick in from day one of employment. One being the right to parental leave, another being the right to sick pay. We're going to talk about sick pay in more detail on the next slide. And the big one, in my view, being from protection from unfair dismissal, which currently has a 2-year qualifying period. The other rights there have shorter qualifying periods, so the impact isn't as huge, but it's still there. So we're going to see a situation which we haven't ever actually seen in the UK in the law of unfair dismissal, where someone can start a job and on day one they're protected from being dismissed unfairly. And what that means is full process, disciplinary and grievance procedures being implemented in full, capability procedures being implemented in full, whereas I'm sure many people on this call have come across situations where within the first week or two of employment it's not working out. There's a very quick way to resolve that without the need for those time-consuming processes and without the legal risk of an unfair dismissal claim. So massive change. It has been confirmed that employers can operate probationary periods to assess new hires. What we just don't know at the minute is what that actually means, because the law doesn't actually say anything about probationary periods at the moment. So who knows what that's going to mean. We still think that there's going to be the day one protection, but maybe a bit less of a process required during that probationary period. We are quite certain now, through conversations with the CIPD, we're quite certain it's going to be 6 months maximum probationary period, because one of the things that we talked about with a few clients in kind of informal discussions was, oh, well, great, we'll just do a 2-year probationary period then. And that's not going to be an option. So what it means, of course, it's a massive change. It's going to be a different mindset in terms of how we, first of all, onboard people into the business, making sure we're choosing the right people, better recruitment processes and probably more strict recruitment processes to really kind of gatekeep on who's getting into a job in the first place. And then really good management of those probationary periods to make sure that in the very early days, there is action taken if someone isn't performing or isn't conducting themselves in the way that you would expect. We will be very likely to have to follow the ACAS code for any disciplinary issue and any capability issue, regardless of how long the person has been employed. And that will mean as well changes to internal policies, to our disciplinary procedures, our capability procedures, and line managers are going to be key. There's going to be a lot of line managers who are going to need to be a lot more clear about what legally is required of them, whereas at the minute they've got quite a lot of flexibility in the first 2 years to probably dismiss people quite quickly. We're going to need to change that and make sure that they are aware of those legal risks when they happen. But it's not here yet, so let's not panic too much. Strengthening of statutory sick pay. So I mentioned that it's going to become likely going to become a day one right. So no qualifying period to be eligible for sick pay. They're also looking to remove the lower earnings limit, so effectively make SSP available to all workers regardless of what they earn. Currently, your lower paid workers don't qualify for any statutory sick pay. They're also planning to remove that 3-day waiting period. So the first 1, 2, 3 days that someone's off, they currently don't get any pay, whereas SSP will be paid from the first day of absence if this goes ahead. And effectively, this is just making SSP more accessible. I've not heard anything about whether the rate of SSP is going to change drastically. It's not that high. I always forget the amount, but it's in the region of £100 a week. So it's not mega, but of course it is going to create a cost implication for businesses. Those odd days here and there of sickness absence are going to now have a cost, whereas we have lots of conversations with clients where it doesn't cost us anything anyway, just a bit of inconvenience. Well, there will now be some cost there when people are taking odd days. And it could lead to higher levels of short-term absence because whereas at the moment workers who, let's just call it what it might be, pulling a sickie, they don't have to, they currently have to think about, well, it's a full day of pay lost or a full 2 days of pay lost, whereas there'll be some compensation attached if they do take those odd days here and there. So it could actually impact absence rates, which are already quite high across the country as it is. In terms of what we can do, though, we can look at absence management policies and processes, make sure those are really good. I know lots of our clients have really good practices when it comes to staying on top of absence, having welfare meetings when people are hitting a certain threshold of absence, and really keeping on top of it. So there's that, as well as being prepared for those higher costs, maybe reviewing your current sickness absence records for those odd days, the one or 2 days of off, looking at what that looks like over a year and what the potential cost increase would be if that was to be paid, as opposed to the current situation where it's not paid. Flexible working. So we've talked loads about flexible working because the law changed only this year in April, where flexible working requests are now available to all employees from day one of employment, and people can make requests twice in a 12-month period. So there's already been some changes there, but we're very much there talking about the right to request flexible working. Whereas what Labour are talking about doing is making flexible working the default. So employers will be more expected to accommodate flexible working as far as is reasonable. Whereas at the moment, we allow employees to request flexible working, but we do have a number of reasons as businesses why we can reject those requests. So it's a different way of looking at it, really, and putting more of the power with the employee there. So rather than having that process where employees have to request and employers go through a process but are able to refuse, it's going to be more actually, how do we accommodate this? Only if it's not possible to accommodate it, can we refuse? So as I mentioned, the power very much moves from the employer to the employee with regards to flexibility. And remember, this is all from day one as well. So could create early conversations about flexibility when someone joins the business. And in doing that, we're going to need another revamp. We've only just revamped all of our policies on flexible working, but we're going to need another one to make sure that policies reflect the new changes, make sure again that managers are aware of that right to flexibility, so that when employees inevitably ask for it, they're not falling foul of any statutory rights by dismissing those requests out of hand. So that'll be quite a huge change, especially considering we've only just had all that shift with the new rights coming in this April. So this is a new one, and we don't really know much about this, but we are going to be looking to have a single enforcement body. Now, we don't have much detail at all, but we know that it would be known as the Fair Work Agency. The purpose of this body would be to effectively make sure that these workers' rights are being actually implemented and enforced within businesses. So whilst it's been discussed previously over many years, I can't even remember when it was last talked about, with consultations going on, it never actually went ahead. But Labour have said that this is a key part of their plan for making work pay. So we don't yet know what the remit will be, but we would imagine that they might have powers such as carrying out inspections, maybe fining companies who aren't properly complying with employment law, fines and penalties and that kind of thing if the rights are either not being provided or policies aren't being followed, contracts aren't informing employees of what their rights are and all that kind of thing. So it's good stuff anyway, of course, to make sure that work practices are basically ingraining employees' rights into the workplace. So it shouldn't really be anything new. It's obviously just a higher risk. If we've got now an external body who can come in and inspect and fine, there's more at stake if we get it wrong. So we will be needing to do full reviews of policies, procedures, contracts, handbooks, in line with any of these legislation changes if and when they come in. And actually, again, making sure the implementation is there as well. So we imagine it's not going to be good enough to just have the policies there, but we're going to need those managers actually implementing these things day to day and being able to evidence that that's the case as well. Trade union stuff likely to change. Labour's vision on trade unions is that effectively what they said was they visualised this new partnership of cooperation between trade unions, employers and the government. So effectively trying to just create a stronger collective voice for employees. So the previous government for the last 14 years has had quite heavy restrictions on trade union activity and the recognition process for actually getting recognised as a trade union within a business, whereas those are all going to effectively go. So it's going to be much more simple for a union to gain statutory recognition. So it just means that we might see more of it. We don't see much trade union activity across our clients at the moment, so we're just going to expect to see more of that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Unions are helpful in a lot of circumstances, so it just means that we need to be aware of that and how that might impact on collective bargaining, making decisions in the workplace if we're going to be more likely to have trade union involvement. Whereas I'm going to say about over 90% of the time when we're dealing with clients' workplaces, we don't have to consider trade union involvement at all. So again, with this one, we're looking for the detail to come out. If you've already got employees who are members of trade unions, we're likely to just see more actual activity rather than just a trade union member coming to a formal meeting. We'll probably just see more day-to-day activity from the unions rather than that more reactive stuff. And if you don't currently have employees who are in trade unions, it might be something that you see more of going forward. So it's just something to be aware of. It says wary there. I'm not sure if we need to be wary, but aware of. Living wage. So we've already got national minimum wage. We've already got national living wage. We've also got the real living wage. And Labour have now spoken about a genuine living wage, just to keep us all on our toes. Now, I believe a couple of days ago, it was announced that the Labour's first budget is going to take place on the 30th of October. So we're going to know more about this then in terms of what that living wage actually looks like. But effectively, we're going to be looking to flatten the national minimum and living wage structure. So at the moment, you probably know it's based on age. I personally have always disagreed with that in terms of a 20-year-old being paid less than a 22-year-old for doing the same role. So we're going to have a flat structure, regardless of age, people getting paid the same level. We just don't know yet what that level will be. So again, there's obviously a cost increase. If you are a business who currently pays staff at or close to the national minimum or living wages, this is obviously going to have an impact because your costs will go up likely in April when we generally get that increase, particularly if you've got a lot of young employees, because we imagine that they're going to basically get rid of those middle bands where you've got the younger people being paid less and bring those up to match that top level of £11.44, I think is the standard now. So budgeting is going to be key. Thinking about, obviously more will be clear in October when we've got the budget and we know what the rate will be, but already thinking about what if all of your staff were paid at that level, regardless of their age. It'll be interesting to see what happens with apprentices, whether they will still be paid a lower rate, taking into account the fact that they get training. We will see. We just don't know that yet. And as mentioned, we expect to get more information when we get that first budget. Sorry, I'm just always looking at time because I can talk. So extra protections here. So again, we've had some changes to employment law already this year, strengthening the rights of employees who are on maternity leave or who are pregnant or who are returning from maternity leave. But this will effectively go a bit further if it goes ahead, effectively making it unlawful to dismiss a woman who's had a baby for 6 months after her return to work. So the protection at the moment is that a person who returns from maternity leave is protected in the sense of a redundancy, in that they should be prioritised for any other employment that's available at that time. This would be unlawful to dismiss for any reason. However, there will have to be exceptions. There will just have to be specific examples such as gross misconduct. I wouldn't imagine that would be unlawful. If it was a redundancy situation where the business was closing, I would imagine that makes sense to be an exemption as well. But what we're effectively thinking is that it's going to be very hard to lawfully dismiss someone for 6 months after returning from maternity leave. So this isn't going to really impact businesses day to day, but it is something to be really aware of when you have employees who notify you of their pregnancy, thinking about future business restructures, reorganisations, if that's likely to happen when the person is off or soon after they return. There's a massive risk there. So it's definitely something to be aware of, and also making sure that managers are aware of that as well. So it's no surprise then that if all those things go ahead, it's obviously going to be quite a big impact on SMEs in particular. It is all if, but let's just go on the basis that all these things are changing. The effects on you guys effectively, and me, I'm a small business owner as well, amending policies and procedures. Now, we've had quite a lot of queries since the King's speech where clients have been asking us, right, so shall we rewrite our policies? Shall we rewrite our contracts? And my advice is no, because we don't know yet. And as we know with governments, what they say they're going to do and what actually happens aren't always aligned for one reason or another. There's a huge process to go through to get any of these things actually into the law. So we don't need to do anything. But what we would recommend you do at this point is think about what policies and procedures would need to be amended if these things went ahead. So almost planning for it without actually taking action too much, because you need to know what kind of time is going to be involved. If you are a company that has an awful lot of policies and procedures that aren't necessarily in an easy, accessible or editable way, the impact's going to be greater. Whereas if you don't really have as many policies and procedures and they're very easy to find and edit, the impact might be less. So it's just thinking about what you've got at the moment and what will need to change, and what kind of time that's likely to take up. I've mentioned management training. It's good anyway. We've always recommended management training. We're actually running one of our HR essentials for managers next month in September. It's kind of HR training, but not intended to make managers HR professionals. It's just trying to make people aware, anyone who's got any people management responsibility, making sure that they know what the basic employment rights are, what the correct policies specific to your business are that they should be following day to day, and just making sure that those employment rights are enforced in their day-to-day management of people. As mentioned, contracts and handbooks may need rewriting, particularly around the day one protections against unfair dismissal. We will often have in our contracts and handbooks that disciplinary and grievance procedures don't apply for the first 2 years. That will no longer be the case, and we'll need much more clarity and detail, I would say, in relation to probationary periods, depending on what the law actually allows for within those probationary periods. In terms of decision making, if you have a situation where your line managers are currently allowed to make those decisions around quick dismissals in the first 2 years, hiring decisions at a lower level maybe are delegated to your managers, we might need to have a look at how those decision-making processes are organised going forward, because there's more regulation to consider. There's likely going to be more enforcement with that Fair Work agency coming into it, and no doubt employees will be more aware of their rights if they come in as well. So actually thinking about internally who's allowed to make these kind of decisions. Is there a requirement for line managers to take legal advice before making those decisions, or is there someone else internally who can be a sounding board for those? Because that's where we often see the problems come in, is where someone's made a decision and they just didn't realise what the right thing to do was legally. So it's not often intentional. So obviously with all this extra change will come a much higher risk, unfortunately. Obviously stronger likelihood of trade union action. There's not much we can do about that, but it's an effect. It's an effect from these changes if they go ahead. So just be aware of the potential. One of the proposals is to have a requirement for us to make it clear in an employment contract of employees' rights to join a trade union. So even things like that, making sure we're actually talking about opportunities to join a trade union, whereas at the minute we very rarely see it mentioned in our non-unionised clients. And as I mentioned, the short service dismissals, it's no longer going to be a quick thing. It's going to be a mindset shift for all of us, including us as HR advisors. Those of you who call us regularly for HR support, one of the first things we ask is how long has the person been employed? So we're going to need very different mindset, all of us, and making sure that those policies and procedures are clear. Also making sure that, as I mentioned at the start, recruitment is done well. We've got the right people actually doing the recruitment to effectively screen people so that they're not getting into the role if we're not pretty sure. Obviously, we can never be 100% sure, but we're not pretty sure that it's going to work out. So how can we mitigate issues? There are things that we can do now to kind of future-proof against this. If it all comes in one go, which it could well do, we just don't know yet, it's going to be a huge change all at once. So there are little things that we can do, even though nothing's definite. But the first thing I would say is just don't freak out just yet. I've seen lots of panic happening, and I've seen lots of posts on social media, and I get a lot of email marketing as well, and it's almost like the world's going to end and we've all got to really worry about getting sued for saying something wrong to a staff member because of Labour government, and that's just not the case. We don't need to worry just yet. Of course there's going to be huge adaptations and there's going to be huge change, but it's not here yet and we don't know the detail yet. So we don't want to over egg it at this point and take steps to completely overhaul our processes, because actually some things might not change. But in terms of preparation, when we're thinking ahead, some of our clients are talking through at more of a people strategy level around what their plans are for next year in terms of growth, maybe sale, restructuring, all these different things. And we're saying, right, okay, so what does the business look like in a year's time? Is there potential that we're going to need restructuring? Is there going to be a need for more flexibility? Or actually, do we need less flexibility? What's happening with that? Thinking ahead now will help you then plan for what the impact of these changes would have. So when I'm saying about company reorganisations and things like that, thinking about, well, if we were to do that now, it would look like this. But if we were to do it when all these changes were in, what would be different? And it can really help you be prepared and start thinking in those terms. In terms of flexibility on contracts, it's a good opportunity anyway. And I've always said this since I left my care sector role, which is over 10 years ago now. We always would review the use of 0 hours contracts anyway, because it's good practice to do that. If we end up having some people who are on a 0 hours contract, but they're actually working 40 hours a week, should we just offer them a 40-hour a week contract, or at least have the conversation with them? But also then thinking about how you currently schedule shifts, how you currently word your contracts of employment. There's lots we can do with contracts in terms of flexibility. It doesn't have to be 0 hours. We can do annualized hours contracts. I mentioned seasonal, but there is a lot of creativity around how we word those contracts. It doesn't have to be X amount of hours a week, Monday to Friday, whatever. It can be much more flexible than that. So think about how you might be able to do that now, because it's a good thing to do anyway. We don't need to wait for 0 hours contracts to be banned to some extent. It's probably a good thing to do anyway. I mentioned before, just begin reviewing those handbooks, policies. Just think about what the impact will be on those. Is there a huge amount that you would need to change? Is it only a small amount? Who's going to be tasked with doing that? Our retained clients who are on the call, we will be doing that for you, so don't worry about that. And I've already mentioned a few times, just making sure that your managers are equipped. If you've got new managers coming through, or you're thinking actually maybe next year you intend to have more managers within the business because the structure is going to change, think about how you are onboarding those managers. When we're promoting people based on technical expertise, which is often the case, how are we making sure they're getting this kind of knowledge as well? Are we doing an induction for managers when they're promoted, so that they're getting the basic HR knowledge, basic employment law knowledge that they need? And it's a good thing anyway. I mean, we know the benefits of developing people, and we know the benefits of actually making people feel as though they're constantly learning as well. It's an investment in them. So again, it's just good stuff to do anyway, but it'll be more important once these things actually come in. And in terms of thinking about how your HR is at the moment, we always position HR in terms of these 3 columns or these 3 points on a curve. So thinking about where your business is currently on this curve, where there's 3 levels, effectively your compliance bit, where you've got your administration of payroll, contracts of employment, data protection, compliance. It's very much the basic level that everybody will have to some extent. We'll have policies, we'll have basic stuff. We then have your operational HR. So thinking about how good training and development is, how good your processes for managing absence, how good your policies are, and how much are they actually tailored to your particular business, rather than policies that have been inherited or templates that haven't been updated properly. Thinking about that more detailed part of HR. And then going up to the top end of the curve, where we're looking at the strategy. So I mentioned before about thinking about the business in the future and how we're going to get it to there. So aligning your people strategy to your organizational strategy, making sure we're doing succession planning. We're looking at employee engagement and employee experience, and we're actually focused on that joined up approach to thinking about people. So it's not just compliance. And actually that strategic thinking is going to really help automatically comply with some of these requirements, because we're putting more thought into all elements of HR. So I've got a techie bit here. I'm quite chuffed with myself, because this is the first time I've put a QR code on anything, and I've tested it and it does work. If you would like to get a personalised report of where your business is at in terms of being prepared for these changes, we have a completely free quiz won't take long to complete, but you'll answer a few questions about your business. So if you want to scan that code in, I'll leave it on the screen for a minute or so. You've then got the web page up. You don't need to do it now, obviously, but at least you've got the web page up, and you will then get a personalized report for your business, which will give you some tips and pointers about which areas might need to be more priority for you in terms of what you're thinking about when preparing for this new raft of employment rights. I'm dead excited about this, so I hope it's working for people. But yeah, I'll move on. If anyone does just want a link sent out in the normal way, I can always pop that out on an email afterwards as well. But that's it. And I said about 40 minutes, and I'm just at 40 minutes. So I'm quite pleased about that as well. But of course, all of you who are already clients on the call, we're here to support. We're going to keep up to date with everything. When the budget comes out, we'll be sending out a summary of what's discussed. When we see what the detail of this employment rights bill is, we'll be summarising it for you. We're just here to help, just to keep you up to date. So if you're on this webinar, you'll also get our email updates, which tend to only be once a month. We don't spam, but if we do get any news flashes and important news like the King's Speech, we will send out a bulletin quite soon after, just to keep you up to date, so you know what you actually need to do and when. But that's it. I'm going to just flip back to Teams. I don't know if there's any questions, but that's it. I do hope it was helpful, and I hope that nobody's freaking out or panicking, because there really isn't a need. It's just being aware at this point. But thank you very much for attending. I can see a couple of people are typing, but if there are no questions, you're very welcome to go and enjoy the rest of your day, which has actually turned out sunny, which is a surprise after this morning. You're very welcome. Thank you for the thank yous. Yes, Louise, I'm going to, it's actually recording now, so I will, as soon as the recording's ready, you'll probably get a notification in Teams, but I'll send it via email as well. You can always watch it back. You're welcome. Thank you. QR code. Yes, I can put it up again with my now technical wizardry. Let's go back. There we go. This won't be the last QR code I use. I'm too excited about it. I'm just now thinking about how else I can. It does work. Thanks. I was thinking, oh no, it worked for me, but what if it doesn't work for everyone else? Thanks, everyone. And nice to see names. I know I can't see you in human form, but nice to see you all here. No problem. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Helen. Have a great day, everyone. I'll close the meeting. Obviously, if there's any questions, get in touch, but I will see you all soon. Bye.